Welcome to Free Lunch Podcast, home of the New South Movement and the New South Movement Network. This is your boy Tight, one half of the Free Lunch Podcast duo. BG, I had to think about that. I'm
Hey
doing
man,
so.
what
We
wrong with you?
record we recording so frequently and so often, sir, that I had to think about which show we was recording for just
We
then.
show you recording what day it is, what time of day it is. It's always saying this PG27 kid, man. We back at it. Yeah, we switched that thing up, boy.
BG, we working, man.
Yeah, I had to tell somebody the other day, like, I got two jobs. I got my career job, the one I went to school for, and the one I love doing. So, yeah, we working, man, all the time.
We always working, and the thing about it is this is the one that I enjoy doing. You mentioned that you had two jobs. Likewise, I have two jobs. We find times and opportunities when we have the privilege of interviewing legends. So when we have an opportunity to view a legend, similar to what we're going to do today, you really just have to work around their schedule and their time, and that's kind of what we're doing today.
Because if the people knew how we were doing this one, they be like, these boys done lost their damn mind. But hey, it is what it is. We got to get it done, and so we gonna do it.
Yeah, we got to get it done.
Gorilla style.
Definitely. But just not even to delay this particular legend in the game. Both you and I are both adamant SEC football fans, love the game, love the sport, love college football, and find ourselves watching it each and every Saturday during the college football season, and specifically SEC football. And you always look at the schedule when the schedules comes out to see who's playing on CBS at that 2:30 game, that 2:30 time slot for those on the Central Coast, Central Standard Time, and then that's that 3:30 game for the East Coast watchers. But I say all that to say, if you do watch CBS, and I hope you do, there's a legendary voice that you get to hear and you get a chance to really listen to. And on our show today, BG, we got an opportunity to actually talk to a legend, and a walking legend in the flesh. So anything you want to add to that, BG?
And the game Saturdays just ain't Saturdays without this voice. To many, he might be one of the most controversial figures as it relates to SEC football in those Saturdays. But that 2:30 game over time has become that game that you never know which way it's going to go. You could have a team that's coming in as the favorite going against the underdog, and the game might come down to the very last play. And with him and his partner, they're there every Saturday, just delivering the game, putting their commentary on it, and, we just gotten accustomed to it. So, to have this opportunity to live in a living color, be able to have this particular figure come on and spend some time with us, man, oh my goodness. That's all I can say. Oh my goodness.
We're gonna bring him on, and allow you all to get a chance to hear Mr. Verne Lundquist in his own words, and really just sit back and enjoy a great storyteller, a great mind of the game, and really someone that continues to bring that enthusiasm on a weekly basis. So sit back and enjoy this show.
Indeed.
Get some. Y'all in the winner's circle, shot some squares though. You in the killing fields, ignoring the scarecrows. Yeah, ho, I'm Benny Blanco in the last scene, making the power play high off of caffeine. This is a tag team, fair to see the bad dream. The male version of Carrie killing the class queen. Bati bloggers quit dodging my emails. Take that whack shit off, the real prevail.
So BG, as we previously discussed, we have a legend on the call. For those that listen to SEC football on a weekly basis during the college football season, you would definitely recognize this voice, a legend. Even if you capture the March Madness, he does some games during March Madness, as well as the Masters and some of his legendary calls that he's made over the years, such as "Yes Sir" with Jack Nicklaus in '86, "In Your Life" in 2005, the call that when Tiger made that miraculous chip shot. So no further ado, we'd like to welcome to our audience and to the show a legend, Mr. Verne Lundquist. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine, JD. How about yourself?
Man, we are doing great, excellent. It is an honor to talk to a legend on the call and have you on our show. So just wanted to again thank you for your willingness to dial into the show. Are you calling from Steamboat Springs, Colorado today?
I am indeed. I'm looking out at the mountain as we speak, the ski area, and spring has not arrived here yet.
Wow.
We've had about 2.5 feet of snow in the last 2 weeks. But mercifully, the ski area's been closed. It closed about 3 weeks ago. But mercifully today the sun is out, and it is beautiful, and we can see little buds on the trees, so spring won't be far behind.
Yeah,
So
it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah, it's definitely coming. I've heard that you've been known as the mumbler. Can you kind of explain? Can you explain?
We've lived here for... we moved here 32 years ago, 84, and it's a beautiful, beautiful town. Our town is 12,000 permanent residents, but then when we're full during a ski weekend or something like that, we have 25,000. I beg your pardon, 13,000 guest beds in town. So we double in size, and one of our geographical features here that is so nice is called the Yampa River. It winds through and it ultimately winds up over in Utah and then finally gets to be a part of the Green River in the Colorado and goes through the Grand Canyon. But part of it is here. Anyway, we have an 8-mile long trail that we can use for jogging or biking, just walking, which is what I do. And I got into this habit a long time ago. The way I memorize rosters for football games, or depth charts is what we really call them. I walk with the depth chart in my hand, and I can do it probably within an hour. So I'll go a half hour down, half hour back, and I talk out loud. It just seems to work better for me. And I'll go over the depth chart. You know, at left tackle you got number 85 or 75 so and so, and left guard and center and so on. But people walk by, and it's like I'm some strange apparition on the trail because I do mumble to myself. I try not to talk too loud, but I'll plead guilty. I'm the Steamboat Springs mumbler.
So the work never stops. Even though you're not actually in the booth, you're still prepping and preparing for the upcoming game.
Oh gosh, yes. I think there's a misconception. I hear it a lot. You know, by golly, I wish I had a job like yours. You show up on Saturday afternoon and, you go up to Press Box and you work for 3.5 hours and then you get on an airplane and fly home. It's not that at all. This is it's not a 7-day-a-week process, but it's 5, 6, and there's a ton of reading and memorization that is involved, beginning in July. And this is just the SEC I'm talking about now. It's a different form of preparation for golf or basketball or anything like that. But on a typical week, getting ready for a college football game, I keep a constant pile in folders of material relevant to each team in the conference, whom we will do. And those things tend to fill up once summer camp starts. And it's reference material. You know, the internet has made it so easy to collate and accumulate articles. So that's ongoing. So I'm reading all the time and making notes. The actual preparation of memorization, I usually start that on Tuesday, and I've got my own spotting chart that I do have a fellow who helps me prepare it. He prints it, but then it takes me 3.5 to 4 hours to each week make the notes that I need on that chart. And when I say a spotting chart, if you can imagine a large piece of cardboard paper, and let's just say we're doing Alabama-Auburn. On one side of it would be the Alabama offense in a depth chart position. In other words, we'd have the offensive line, and they'd go 3 deep. The running backs, they'd go 3 deep. Wide receivers, slot receivers, tight ends. And then immediately opposite that on the top is the Auburn defense. Same thing, 3 deep. And then you flip this card over, and you would have on that side the Auburn offense on the bottom and the Alabama defense on the top. So that is the most critical tool that we use during the broadcast. And I have a man named Butch Baird who's been with us about 6 years. He stands to my left. He lives in Philadelphia, and CBS allows me to fly him in each week. So he's a constant, and he's there with binoculars. And so while Gary Danielson and I are chatting back and forth, say during a replay, or once the ball is snapped, it's all mine. Mm-hmm. And once the tackle is made, it's all Gary's. Mm. And the replays are coming at us from a different location. And my guy to my left, Butch, is there, and he's helping me identify players because he's got binoculars on him. And then also in the booth, we've got my statistician who's been with me for 20 years. He's to my far left. His name is Chuck Gardner. He lives in Washington. Same thing. He does basketball and football with me. And if you're envisioning the press box, it would be Chuck, Butch, me, then Gary, and then a fellow named David Moulton, who is Gary's spotter and statistician. So that's the lineup in the front of the booth. And then we've got other people in the booth. We've got a stage manager. We've got the main game cameraman, and we have an audio assist, a woman named Barbara Hanford. So, and just to go back to your point, it's a very, very complex operation. And the same 75 people work every SEC game. So we live around the country. We come together on Thursday. Friday's a big work day. Saturday we do the game. And then we go home either Saturday night or Sunday morning and do the whole thing somewhere else the next week.
I had no idea, BG, that many folks, all that was going on with you and Gary calling each play. That's amazing. Background.
And the fun, the challenge of it is it's live.
Definitely.
And we don't get do-overs. When I read something in print that is egregiously mistaken, or I read something on a blog where it's grammatically incorrect, it causes me to wince because it's poorly done, and they had a chance to correct it before they send it out. In our case, once that word or words, once those words get beyond your lips, it's out there. And it's going to be available for somebody to criticize forever, really. And so, but that's the challenge and that's the fun of it, is reacting to something that is taking place in real time. And then with all the other elements, I mean, in the truck itself, we've got a producer, a director, a technical director, audio guys, 7 videotape technicians, associate producer, associate director, and that's in one truck. And then we have another truck that travels with us that's filled with all the graphics people. And they're the ones who put 3rd and 10 and, so far he's rushed for 48 yards, that kind of stuff. It comes out of a separate truck.
So Vern, you did an excellent interview with Sports Illustrated that we won't repeat a lot of the questions. So I do recommend to our listeners and anyone that's interested to go pull up that interview that you spoke about how you met your wife, which is I think one of the greatest stories that I've heard you tell, and I've listened to a few of your interviews, not only in preparation for our for today's call, but also just because I'm a fan. Like one quick question that we had: can you talk about how you got into first radio and now into being able to do it live on television?
Oh, sure, I'd be glad to, and I will speak to any college or university's communications kids whenever I'm asked. I just think that's one of the interacting with people who aspire to do this is one of the responsibilities that those of us who are lucky enough to do it have all the time. So most recently I spoke, it was about 2 weeks ago. I spent 2.5 hours at the University of Georgia speaking and interacting with the communications majors at the Grady School of Communications at Georgia. And inevitably is, the question, because it is an unusual job, well, how do I get to do what you do? Well, my story won't help you at all because I have such an unusual means by which I got into the business, which I'll share with you. I went to Texas Lutheran University. It's a school of about 1,500, liberal arts college about 30 miles from San Antonio. And I loved the 4 years I spent there. I'm still very, very, very close to the school. I'm on the board of regents and interact with them as much as I possibly can. And I got a degree there in sociology with a minor in history. And I was not a good athlete. I knew that early on. But I loved athletic competition. And my compensation for not being a gifted athlete was to write about it. So even in high school, I wrote a weekly sports column for our high school newspaper. I did the same thing at Texas Lutheran in Seguin for 4 years. And I was blessed with a decent voice and never really had any fear of being in front of the public or talking on radio or television. So one of the ways I got into it, back door, I did a lot of public address work at the college football games and the college basketball games. And that led, ultimately, my senior year, I auditioned for a part-time weekend disc jockey position with KWED in Seguin, Texas. 1580 on your radio dial, and sign up and sign up. It was daytime only. But I would, on Saturday and Sunday, for 1 year, I did that. And I would sign the station on and run the programs, and they gave me my own disc jockey show in the afternoon. So that was my senior year. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my dad was a Lutheran minister, and I had no qualms about being raised in a parsonage. He and my mother both gone now a long time ago, but because of his influence in my life, I thought, well, what the heck? It's 1962. I don't know what I really want to make out of my life. So I enrolled and attended the Lutheran School of Theology in Rock Island, Illinois for 1 year. And how am I going to put myself through school? We didn't have a lot of money. Well, I auditioned for and earned a job in the summer of '62 in Clinton, Iowa, KROS. But this was a big-time operation. This was sun up to midnight. And I worked a 4 to midnight shift as a disc jockey. And we're talking, you think top 40. This is in the early 60s, so it was really middle-class music and kind of soothing stuff. And then right before I started seminary, theological school, I got a call from the station in Davenport, Iowa, WOC. We have a job for you as a part-time disc jockey working 9 to midnight Monday through Friday. Well, it was perfect. Davenport was right across the aisle from the river, the Mississippi River from Rock Island, where I was going to school. Well, I did that for a year. I knew early on that I was not destined for a life in the ministry. I just didn't have the commitment, the calling, however you want to describe it. And I did complete. I've got 18 hours from the Lutheran School of Theology. But I knew I didn't want to come back for a second year. And I was kind of lonesome and homesick. So I applied for a replacement disc jockey position in my hometown of Austin, Texas, KTBC. And I got it. I was hired, minimum wage. This would have been the summer of 1963. And I was playing, I was a backup disc jockey for FM. The sports director's job on television opened up while I was there. This was the only TV station in Austin. It was owned by President and Mrs. Johnson. And having grown up in Austin, I remember when they went on the air. And a guy named Dan Love had been their sports director for 12 years, the entirety of the time they were on the air. He took a job in Houston. And I, not knowing what I wanted to do, I thought, boy, this would really be fun. So I went in and auditioned to become the sports director on television at Channel 7 in Austin. That was in August of 63. And the guy liked me enough to offer me the job. So I supplemented the week. I started as the weekend guy, and this would have been Labor Day weekend, 53 years ago. And they hired another guy as the full-time sports director. He didn't work out, and they offered me the job. So that's where I got my start in television. And then it's just you apply for positions, you get lucky, you get knocked down, you go back, and so I worked in Austin for 3 years, San Antonio for 1. I got a position at the ABC affiliate in Dallas, biggest step, I think, professionally ever. It was Channel 8 in Dallas. And that led to an association with the Cowboys. I started with a pre- and post-game show. Then I did the halftime work on the Cowboy Network. And in 72, the fellow who'd been the play-by-play man, Bill Mercer, took a job with the Texas Rangers baseball. Mm-hmm. And that opened up the Cowboys play-by-play job. And I was put into that position in 72. I stayed there for another 12 years. And that led to an ABC position, and that ultimately led to CBS. So I don't know if anybody wants to take that and run with it and see if you can replicate it. I don't think it would happen.
How did you enjoy working at with the Cowboys? How was that experience for you?
Well, it was life defining, really. Interestingly, guys, just last Thursday, a man named Blackie Sherrod died. He was 96 years of age, and Blackie Sherrod never worked outside of the Texas market. I've read Jim Murray, I've read Furman Bisher, I've read Ed Pope, I've read Red Smith. Blackie Sherrod was the greatest sports columnist who ever lived in my lifetime. And he was the color man for the Cowboy Radio Network, in addition to writing his sports column. He is the guy who incidentally hired Dan Jenkins, the author of Semi-Tough and Baja, Oklahoma, and so many other great sports novels. And Blackie just passed away. Well, I took his place on the Cowboy as a color guy. And then, ironic, because of Blackie's death, I think, I've been corresponding with a lot of the old goats. And Dan Jenkins and I exchanged texts just the other day after Blackie had passed away. And Bill Mercer, who was the play-by-play guy whose departure opened it up for me, is now 90 years of age. He's living in retirement in Charlotte, lost his wife about 8 years ago. Well, this caused the two of us to get back. And he wrote me a note yesterday, and he said, "You realize we haven't corresponded this much in 30 years." But we were on the periphery of the family, of the Cowboy organization. But I think the greatest thing to come out of those 16 years total that I spent with them were lifelong friendships. Those guys were, Leroy Jordan just called me yesterday morning, the outstanding middle linebacker from Alabama and with the Cowboys. They're getting ready to do a book on him. So he wanted to know if they could call me, and I said, oh, my gosh. We do a reunion dinner once a year when we're in Dallas, and it's the Jordans and the Chuck Howleys and the Roger Staubachs, Mel Renfro. I was a great friend of Bob Hayes, a great friend of Bobby, and we lost him way too early. But those friendships, as all of us have grown older and have looked back with some yearning on those days, the fact that we stay together is just, in my mind, an awesome thing. I loved the 16 years I spent with them.
Verne, you've gone from seminary to radio to television. What are your family members and close friends saying as they see you transition?
I'll tell you a funny story about my dad. My dad had he died at 85, and he died 16 years ago. Excuse me. He was ordained in the same theological school where I went. He was ordained on D-Day, 1944, June 6th. He had three churches in his life, in his career. One in Everett, Washington, which is where I spent my early childhood. Then he was in Austin for 16 years, and that was where I was living with my mom and dad when I got the opportunity to go into television. And then he wound up his career. They moved to Omaha, Nebraska in the late 60s and lived there until they both passed away. But here I was a seminary dropout, essentially. And I living at home in my mother and dad's home, and I got this job offer to go to work in sports television in August of '63. So I tell this story a lot at banquets. So people would assume that my dad was probably disappointed because I had not chosen to follow the same career path he had. But when I told my dad that I was going to go on the air, and this is, University of Texas, of course, is there, and I said, well, Pop, this is what I've decided to do, and I hope you are in agreement with it. And by the way, one of the perks that I get, and they don't do this anymore, but they did back then, I get 4 tickets to every Texas home game. And he looked at me and his eyes got big, and he said, well, the Lord does work in mysterious ways.
I knew where you were going.
Yeah. Now, the family, my parents are gone. I've lost one brother. I'm the oldest of 5, and 4 boys and a girl. And I'm the oldest, and then my brother, and we're a diverse family. My brother David lives in Guadalajara, Mexico. He was an able-bodied seaman working for BP, as a matter of fact. It was acquired, Arco it used to be. And he sailed for 40 years from Long Beach to Valdez, and he met and married a young woman from Mexico, and they've lived in Guadalajara for 30 years, I guess. My brother Dan lives in Austin, married for 47 years, 3 kids, 7 grandkids. He's still working like I am, and I'm just so proud of him, I can't stand it. He sold trucks all of his life, and he's done very well with it. We lost my brother Tom, who was 10 years younger than me. He suffered an aneurysm when he was 30 years old and survived, married, had 2 girls, but he was handicapped physically and some other degrees all of his life. We lost him 10 years ago, and we're still very close with his wife. And then I've got a sister, Sharon. She lives in Lincoln, Nebraska, and has a son. She's not married anymore, but she and I correspond periodically. So that's the family, and I think they're all fairly pleased with what I've been able to do with my life.
I know they are. Vern, can we switch gears a little and talk a little SEC football?
Sure.
So we put this podcast together, and what we've been doing, BG and I, we've been basically making certain we create this digital library so that legends like yourself are always remembered. Can you talk about what it looks like during the season? I heard on the previous show that you during the season you relocate to Atlanta corporate office. How does that preparation week looks like?
Well, we relocate from Steamboat Springs to Atlanta. We usually make the move down there the last week in September. So we would have done at least 2, maybe 3 games from and flown in and out of Steamboat. We've had the corporate apartment now for 7 years, and I'll tell you how much it's helped my sanity. And we live in a beautiful, beautiful area, but it's remote. So in order to get to an SEC game for the first 10 years I did this, I would fly from Steamboat Springs to Denver, Denver to Atlanta, or to New Orleans or Dallas, and then on to the game site. So it was almost every week it was a 9.5-hour commute. And then I'd have to do the same thing coming back. So 7 years ago, my boss said, would it make your life easier if you were in Atlanta? Oh, my gosh. So they instigated this, and then they support it. The company provides the housing for us. So Nancy and I pack up. It's a job, but we relocate for 2.5 months. So we ship all of our suitcases down there, all of our internet materials and so on. And then here's where it helps so much. Any SEC school, if you fly out of Atlanta, is only 1.5 hours. And what we've adopted to now is if we have to fly, we'll fly, and it's Delta connection usually. But if it's within 4 hours, we drive. So we drive to Auburn, we drive to Tuscaloosa, Columbia, Knoxville, Athens, obviously. And we use that. That's our time, Nancy and me. But now, go back to what I told you about the mumbler. I don't walk through the streets of Atlanta. I mumble in the living room, and Nancy says, "Could you just tone it down a little bit?" But I get my spotting chart. I sit at our dining room table in the apartment, and no, we don't talk. We'll do a conference call with myself, Gary, Allie LaForce, who's taken Tracy Wolfson's spot. Right. Craig Silver has been our producer forever. Our director is Steve Milton. And we'll do a conference call early in the week just to and try to set up what we want to accomplish as a group. But really the preparation is individual. Craig will send out a memo usually on Tuesday afternoon, things that he wants the younger guys on the staff to accumulate and get ready for the broadcast. Highlights of this, highlights of that. Give me something on so-and-so. But all of our preparation is really individual. And then on Thursday, that's a travel day. So our rule that Craig has set is that you must be on location. You don't have to be, but it's nice if you're on site by Thursday at dinner time. And we'll usually try and get together for maybe the 5 of us with Nancy at some place in, say, Tuscaloosa or Athens. Friday is a full work day. And in the meantime, now the technicians have all arrived. And so they're setting up the trucks on Thursday, and it's a pretty complex operation. It takes a long time. So the technicians are doing what they need to do. The younger production people are getting into it. Our group, which is the on-the-air group plus our producer and director, let's just hypothetically say it's Alabama. We will arrive at the athletic department building probably 10:30, maybe 10 o'clock. And we will interview, and it's all done through the sports information director. we'll have 4 or 5 athletes lined up, and we'll spend 15 minutes with each. And that's a group that we do it in a small conference room, just off the main media room at the campus, on the campus. At 11:30 every Friday, Nick Saban comes in and sits down with us, and we spend a half an hour with him. We will then spend a half an hour with the offensive and defensive coordinators. If there are any more interviews to be done, they'll be done right then. We'll take a break for lunch, and then at 2:30, we're in the booth, and the other guys are down in the truck. Gary and Allie and I would be in the booth, and we do a graphics rehearsal. It takes about an hour and a half, and we go through every graphic that is planned for inclusion in the game telecast the next day. At 4 o'clock, we'll have a production meeting. It usually lasts about an hour, and that's when Gary and I go over any stories that we want to include. Gary does a little teaching lesson for all of us, what he wants to see covered and what his expectations are. And it's a great tool. We all learn a lot. He's as well prepared as any analyst I've ever worked with. And as you guys know, he's also not afraid to express an opinion. But that makes him Gary. And so then we'll break and we'll have dinner somewhere that night. Not always a large group, and not always everybody. It's never mandatory. And then we're back in our rooms. Gary, for example, doesn't like to go out on Friday night. He would prefer to stay in his room with his notes and watch the game on ESPN. And then the next morning, game time, we always leave the hotel, no matter what city we're in or town. We always leave the hotel at 3 hours before kick. And that gets us to the stadium in time to join the last half of the lunch break. And we have that lunch break with all 75 of the crew together. It's just a great time for us to interact with the guys that we don't really see during the game. We're up in the booth an hour and a half before the game, last minute drills, and then 3, 2, 1, go. And we're live for 3.5 hours with almost always the most critical game of the week in the SEC. And then we shut it down and go home and start again the next week.
You talked about it being live and not having any opportunities for do-overs. What is that feeling leading right up to kickoff? Any anxiety, any nerves?
No, it's not anymore. It was, I don't know for how many years. I think here's the key in my mind. If you are prepared, it's like an actor. If you've done your lines and you've memorized it and then you've done it a few times, it's still live in front of a theater audience, but you kind of know what to expect. There are always going to be pitfalls. But I don't think someone on Broadway, this may be an inexact comparison, but I don't think that there's a welcome nervousness to it all. And it's kind of a nice anticipatory feeling, like, oh boy. But you look forward to it so much. And then once you get into the flow of the game, people talk about it. I did with Scott Hamilton 20 years ago, 22. Scott Hamilton, the great Olympic figure skater who remains a dear friend of ours. Scott and I did 3 Olympics together. And we were in Albertville, France in 92, Lillehammer, Norway in 94, and Nagano, Japan in 98. Well, the 94 one is the one that people remember most.
Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding?
Yeah, Tanya and Nancy, right.
Right.
And the Wednesday night, and these numbers I think have been refined down. I don't think that, but I'm looking. I've got a plaque over here on my wall that claims that on Wednesday night I know we had a 48.5 rating.
Right.
And it says 126 million viewers. And I can remember the next day we were at practice, and our president, Neil Pilson, walked over to where Scott and I were sitting in the booth, and he said, "Did you hear about the ratings last night?" "No." 48.5 and 126 million. And Scott started laughing. And he said, "I'm so glad I didn't know about that before we went on the air."
I bet.
You know, I mean, like if we're doing Alabama-Auburn or Alabama-LSU, and the game has relevance, we're all aware that the audience will be pretty wide, pretty large. But I don't really, if I know my stuff, where I get nervous is if I've shortcutted. Mm-hmm. And here's something I hope you guys can take and run with. You're too young, probably, to remember when Chris Schenkel was in his prime. But Chris was a great, great broadcaster, first for CBS and then for ABC. And things didn't start to shake out so well for him toward the end. He was the voice of college football on ABC. And he was replaced by Keith Jackson. And Keith is, in my view, the greatest college football announcer ever. And I asked Keith once, whatever happened to Chris Schenkel? Why did it all go south for him? And I've never forgotten what Keith said. He forgot what it took to become Chris Schenkel. And by that, what he meant was he started taking shortcuts. He wasn't memorizing the names. He was relying on his spotter to get him through. He wasn't categorizing anecdotes that would flesh out the broadcast. And I hate to say this about him, because I don't know that it's true. This is really more what Keith implied, that he just kind of went through the motions, and he got caught with not being adequately prepared. It's a cautionary tale, I think, for me. And I don't want a shortcut.
In regards to I sent you an article when I was trying to get you when I was emailing you, and one of the articles that I sent you poses the question, who is the most hated person in the SEC?
Thank you for that. I got it.
And it went down a list of saying it's not Nick Saban, it's not Greg Sankey, the beloved SEC commissioner, but it was you.
Yeah.
When you read articles like that, and it talks about how folks may hate you because they think you're biased towards their team when calling plays, how do you react to that? How do you respond to those type of comments?
Well, I don't want to say I've got a thick skin. I think we all say, "Oh, I never read that stuff."
So obviously you read the one I sent you.
Well, sure, and then we all read that stuff. And I kind of get it. There is no, especially in the SEC. I don't, I guess, of course, we've all got detractors. That's just the nature of the beast. But I think the passion is so strong among those who follow college football in the SEC, now, much more so, in my view, than the Big Ten or the Pac-12 or the Big 8, whatever they are now. I just think college football is so much a part of life in the SEC. And as you guys know better than anybody, it's lived with that passion 365 days a year. So here's what happens. If, the late Larry Munson was beloved by Georgia fans. Beloved. But I've never heard any more home-centered broadcast in my life than what Larry delivered up until the day he died. And it was, we this and we that. Well, it worked magically for Georgia fans, but that's not what we're hired for. So if there's, and I think it's born out of passion. Alabama fans love Eli Gold, and they would like to listen to a telecast through the prism of his interpretation of what's going on. But we can't do that. We've got to split the middle. And I swear to you, and I get it, that, believe me, I get it. I get it verbally a lot, and especially on the internet. I'm not a big social media guy, So I don't see a lot of the stuff, but I sure hear about it. Auburn fans are convinced that we hate them and we love Alabama. Alabama fans are convinced of just the opposite, but the same goes for Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, LSU. They all feel, and I don't get it, frankly, but they all seem to feel that whomever they are playing, whomever they are, that Gary and I are secretly hoping that the other team will win. It's a weird interpretation of a telecast, but it's born out of passion. And I get the passion, but they need to believe when I tell them we only want a competitive ball game, and that's been true in the 10 years that Gary and I have been together, and the 16 years I've done the SEC.
BG and I are both Auburn alum. So in 2013, you and Gary called two of probably the most memorable games in our tenure that we've seen live, in the prayer and Jordan Hare, as well as the kick sit with Chris Davis. Also, you've called the lights, camera, and action. I know you remember the Cam Newton LSU game, and that became a household phrase. I mean, I'm thinking of Auburn. Obviously, I'm biased,
Sure.
But we saw the I guess the coming out party for A.J. McCarron. I believe that was a night game in LSU. That he kind of got really emotional after that game. What are some of your most memorable games that you remember calling?
Just to go back to 2013. I mean, that was extraordinary. We do the Nick Marshall to Ricardo Lewis.
Yeah, the prayer and Jordan Hare.
On 4th and 18. Obviously, I remember the game, and it knocked Georgia out. And my favorite memory of the game is when we were leaving the air, and Gary said, "This is the greatest college football game I have ever seen. We will never see another like it." Well, we waited 2 weeks. And then we come back and we've got Alabama Auburn, and the most amazing game I've ever seen. That one is I'm always going to have Nicholas in my heart, because that day in '86 I was 17 when he took the lead for the first time at the age of 46, and that day is always, I think, going to be my favorite afternoon of a sporting activity. But Alabama Auburn is right tucked in there 1A, and it's not just the end of it, although that was the greatest finish I think I've ever seen. It was all that led up to it. I mean, that fourth quarter, and the 99-yard pass to open the fourth quarter, the Sammy Coates catch, the run out of bounds, and taking 7 minutes to decide whether or not to put 1 second back. And they did, and then, of course, we know the ending. That's the greatest college game I've ever seen. And we've had others, like you mentioned. We had LSU in Florida when LSU went for it in prime time 5 times on 4th down, and they got all 5 and won the game over Tebow and Florida.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is, I mean, I'm 75 years old, and I've been doing this now for 53 years. And it's the idea that something like that can happen in the most unexpected of circumstances that keeps me coming back and saying, refill my plate. That's the great thing about sports. Did you guys see what happened over in England today or yesterday? Leicester City. A 5,000 to 1 chance.
I saw that. Yep.
Of winning and they did.
And they won.
And, I mean, honest to gosh, that will never happen again. I don't even want to say that. But I read that in the paper this morning, and I thought, that's it. That's the charm of what we're lucky enough to get to do. To go to something and then have something amazing break out in front of you. And it's what keeps me going and will for at least a couple of years.
I know we're wrapping up on time. BG, you had one last question?
Verne just basically answered my last question as far as after all of the hard work and the preparation and the criticism that comes along with the job, what is it that makes him come back for more? And he just answered that question. And that 2:30 game on CBS never disappoints because you never
Never.
know what you're going to get, especially at the end. I've seen some of the wildest things happen on that particular game historically, and so I expect 2016 to bring much of the same.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you something funny. Of course, I did the NFL for years and years and years, and was the number 2 guy behind Summerall and Madden. I worked with Fouts and Terry Bradshaw and Dan Deerdorf, and they called me in the spring of 2000, they being Sean McManus, my boss, who still is, and he said, we're going to switch you to the SEC, and I thought, really? But my first partner was Todd Blackledge, and our first game was Florida at Tennessee. Jesse Palmer hit Jabbar Gaffney with a touchdown pass that he did or did not catch.
I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Still arguable, right?
Yes,
the final was
I remember
27-23, and Florida won it. And I looked at Todd when we got off the air, and I said, are they all like this? And he said, enough of them. So it's you couldn't get me back to the NFL with a chain and a tractor.
Who is your all-time favorite player that you've seen play in the college game? I'm not talking about how they progressed in the NFL, but from a college perspective, I think I have a feeling who it may be, but I'll be interested in hearing who you think. And then the last one is a question that I got from a group of friends that were interested in knowing what are your thoughts on the satellite camps that are going to take place, or that have been.
I can answer that one really quickly.
Okay.
I don't think it's a big problem. I know that Commissioner Sankey and other coaches in the SEC objected to it because they thought it would, the presence of Michigan particularly would intrude on their recruiting areas. I don't think so. So I'm not concerned with that one at all. And I'll bet you anything you were going to say that I was going to say Tim Tebow.
That is exactly who I thought you were going to say.
I know. Gary and I get accused of being in the Tebow camp without being critical at all. And he's in my list of top 5, but it has more to do with his competitive spirit than it does his actual ability.
And I would agree. I would agree with that.
He's as competitive a guy as I've ever. There's a big. Oh, he's going to kill me if he hears that I said this about him. But there's a big puppy dog quality to Tim. There really is, and I know him really well. We did 23 of his games, and he was at Florida. And the internet would go nuts because we were worshiping at the feet of Tim. It was not that, but he was enjoyable to be around. He was one of the great winners we've ever had in college football. And his whole family is remarkable and fun to be around, I think. So he'd be up there in my list. I'll give a shout out to one of the great players in Auburn's history. I got to spend some time a year ago with Bo Jackson, and he was named a legend at the Doak Walker Award. And he came in, and I'm a part of the banquet presentation each year. And I just found him to be an extraordinary, funny guy. I mean, obviously, one of the great athletes ever. I'll never forget, I was doing an interview with him, and I said, is this true that your best 40 time was 4.29? And he said, no, it's 4.12. I mean, wow. he knew. Now, think about that. But, I mean, now, he's not a guy that I ever covered, because my stint in the SEC goes back 16 years. But I think Tebow is in the short list. I'm just off the top of my head trying to think. Aaron Murray was a recent guy that I really admired. at Georgia, the Georgia quarterback.
Definitely.
Yeah. How about Cadillac Williams and Ronnie Brown? I'll give you another Auburn shout-out.
Definitely. Cadillac, right. This was during our tenure. Know those guys personally, and also definitely had to put Cam in that list, right?
Oh, yeah. Cam, yeah, Cam's the greatest player. I'm not so sure that, he'd be on my short list of greatest people I've ever known. But certainly, he's the greatest athlete, quarterback.
Definitely.
And we rode them all the way. We did a lot of Auburn games when he was there.
Definitely.
Yep.
All right. Well,
I'll give you one.
Who's that?
Now,
Who is that?
The best player I ever saw, but I grew extremely close to his parents and to his three sisters, and that's Philip Lutzenkirk.
That is a great one. That's a great way to end this episode and this show. What about coaches? You've worked with the greatest ones. You worked with Nick Saban. Any favorites there? Oh, you can't say.
It's tough to. Instead of saying any favorite, I would say it this way: guys that I think a lot of people don't care for, or don't like, or see warts that we really get along with, and Nick would be at the top of that list. He's always been interactive with us, and he's never been confrontational. I see him at some of these local media sessions, and he calls people out, and I just want to shake him and say, quit it. Quit it. But he's a great coach, and we get along with him really, really well. I was a big fan of Mark Richt, but maybe too nice. And I'll tell you this, I enjoy, to this day, hanging around with Les Miles. We look forward to the hour that we spend with him whenever we do a game in LSU. He's just an enjoyable, fun guy to be around, and he's not afraid to express an opinion.
BG, this has been amazing. Verne, we don't want to keep you any longer than we've done already. Again, thank you for your contributions, not only to this podcast, but to the SEC and what you provide and insight that both you and Gary provide, and let Gary know that we also deem him legendary as well. He's taught me a lot, even as I watch the games. One thing that I can remember from Gary, and feel free to share with him, when he was basically explaining the approach that Auburn uses for sending in players and comparing it to the NHL, and how we had a similar system to hockey.
I remember that. Yes, I do.
I've never forgotten that. But because of that one teachable moment, whenever I watch a hockey game and I'm watching them kind of sub in players, I kind of think of Gary and I think of our offense, and I try to understand how that whole process works. But it was Gary that enlightened me for that particular game.
I'll tell him that. I sure will.
And know that we're listening, and know that we do not fall into the category of most hated. We know that we fall into the category of know you guys come to the table with a non-biased approach to calling the game.
Okay, guys. Thank you. It was very enjoyable.
I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you so much, Verne.
Thank you, DJ.
So, BG, that concludes our show with Verne. What'd you think?
I loved it, man. To actually have a voice and a personality that you with on TV on those Saturdays, to actually be able to spend some time with him, you can't beat that, bro. You cannot beat that, and that's what we do here on this Free Lunch podcast.
That's what we do on this show, so I know we got to get back. How can the people reach us?
Man, we are the Free Lunch Podcast. Check for us, www.freelunchpodcast.com. We're also on Instagram, Free Lunch Podcast, Twitter, Free Lunch Pod C, and YouTube, Free Lunch TV. We are a member of the New South Movement Podcast Network, available on iTunes and SoundCloud. Just search New South Movement, and we'll be right there with this podcast, the Retroscope Podcast, D1 Sports Talk, and the Girl Talk Podcast. Check us out sometime.
We are out of here. Free Lunch Podcast, home of the New South Movement and the New South Movement.